A look at what the empirical data show about the race for the GOP nomination after Rick Perry stumbles in Florida and Herman Cain does well in Florida.
Lawmakers risk even lower ratings.
And Americans' attitudes on the death penalty after a highly publicized execution in Georgia last week. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup's editor-in-chief.
I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today.
The GOP race looks even more fascinating. Susan, you were in Florida last week. You saw it all happen. Rick Perry debated, of course, with 8 other candidates. Gary Johnson of New Mexico was on stage for the first time, at least in recent debates. He was widely perceived as stumbling, and then on Saturday they had a Florida straw poll, and Herman Cain, former Godfather's Pizza CEO, won. What do we make out of all of this?
Well, I talked to a lot of delegates Saturday in Florida, and these were people who came to the Florida convention thinking they were going to support Rick Perry. But they had 2 problems with him. They thought his debate performance was a little uncertain, and they especially didn't like his answer on providing in-state tuition aid to children who are illegal immigrants, children who are here illegally. That cost him a lot. Delegates coming in on Saturday morning before they voted said they were intrigued by Herman Cain. They didn't think that he could win, but they went back to him, and he won the straw poll because of this uncertainty about Rick Perry.
Absolutely. Now, that's excellent insights from the ground in Florida, but we, of course, poll nationally. And you know, Susan, we're waiting for data to come in over the next week or two. Our positive intensity scores go through Sunday, but they're 14 days, and Perry's down a couple of points. But he's still second only to Mr. Herman Cain, who comes in at a 26 and Perry at a 22. So Cain's really strong, has an intense following. Perry's down a little, but I think it's a little early now to know what the long-term impact for Rick Perry in particular is going to be, because we just don't have national polling data as of this point and probably won't for a bit now.
And very frustrating for Herman Cain and his limited staff that he does so well in enthusiasm from voters when he talks to a crowd, does well in the debates, and won the straw poll, and yet he doesn't get as serious attention from the press corps as he wishes he would, because reporters still do not see him as a credible nominee.
And to be fair, our data showed as well, as I mentioned, he does very well on positive intensity, but when we and others run trial heats, and here's a list of candidates to Republicans nationally, who will you vote for? Cain, of course, doesn't do well at all. So it's what you're saying there. People really like Herman Cain, and he engenders enthusiasm, but at least so far, before Saturday, we didn't see any signs that he was going to come along and be a contender against Perry or against Romney. And speaking of Romney, is he sitting on the sideline smiling, I wonder? Our positive intensity show he hadn't changed much. Still mild-mannered, isn't generating a lot of enthusiasm, but if Perry stumbles, he has to be the benefactor.
You know, I think looking at the data and the evidence on the ground, neither Rick Perry nor Mitt Romney have sealed the deal with Republican voters. They like Rick Perry, but they have some concerns. They're not so enthusiastic about Mitt Romney, but maybe he's the stronger nominee against Barack Obama. I think this race is far from over. And
stay tuned, because we'll have data pouring in week by week, and that's what we'll be talking about. By the way, real quickly, Republicans are more enthusiastic about voting now than Democrats. We just asked that question in our USA Today Gallup poll. If that continues, big trouble for Democrats next year.
Big trouble. We know that enthusiasm translates to people going out and bothering to go to the polls. And that's especially a serious issue for Barack Obama. He was elected in 2008 with the support of unreliable voters, young people, college students, Hispanic voters, people who are less likely to be sure to go to the polls. So he needs their enthusiasm to be strong to get that Democratic vote out.
And something's got to change by next year if he's going to get it again, because right now Dems are less enthusiastic than Repubs. What are they doing in Washington, Susan? All this talk of another shutdown, and our data show that we just released on Monday of this week that a lot of our ratings for the federal government and Congress are as low as we have ever seen them in Gallup's history.
4 out of 5 Americans say in this poll that they are dissatisfied with the governance of the country. Just 1 out of 5, 19%, are satisfied with it. Is it possible for those ratings to get any lower? Well, I think if they move toward another showdown over government funding, it's possible. We saw that last time around. It hurt everybody. It hurt President Obama. It hurt Republicans in Congress. The public was saying, a pox on all your houses.
Our data show when we ask Americans, should their representatives compromise or stick to beliefs, we're now tilting a majority, 51%, are way on the compromise end of the scale. And those are particularly Democrats and independents. It's conservatives are somewhat more likely to say, don't compromise. But still, when you put it all together, Americans want compromise.
Americans want compromise, but Tea Party supporters are the least likely to to support compromise. And that tells you one reason why Republicans in particular have been pretty unyielding on some of these issues.
Speaking of Tea Partiers, support down a little. Still having an impact when you were in Florida?
Down to 21% among the Republican voters.
In our USA Today Gallup poll. And that's the lowest we've seen it.
But you know, one thing that's happened, the Tea Party's had a huge influence on the Republican Party itself. So while there may be more questions among some voters about Tea Party and how they operate, they've had a huge effect that's not going away.
Will all of this distaste, disdain for government benefit Obama or benefit the Republican candidate next year? When I look at the data, I really don't know at this point.
You know, you'd think that people would be unhappy, maybe vote out incumbents, both Republicans in the Congress and the president from the White House, but there's no historical precedent for that. When people are unhappy with the government, customarily they take it out on the president's party.
So probably he can't immediately translate this into doing better, but of course we'll wait and see. Most interesting finding of the week, I think, relates to the death penalty. A lot of reporters call me, of course, with the high-profile execution in Georgia of Troy Davis last week. A lot of protesters were protesting that. But you know, Susan, 64% of Americans support the death penalty. It's very strong. You heard people applaud when Rick Perry talked about his Texas record of a lot of executions down there. So at the moment, it resonates with Americans. They like the death penalty. But I don't think it's going to be an issue in the presidential race. Well,
you know, it's a lot of support among Republicans. So as you say, Rick Perry's history of approving a lot of not stopping death penalties in Texas cases is not going to hurt him. And you don't hear Democrats speaking up against the death penalty. It's one of those issues like gun control, where Democrats have decided it costs them too much with some swing voters. They're not going to take that stance.
And, you know, I was asking you this before we began. Barack Obama's position on the death penalty, you don't hear much about it, but
he supports the death penalty, as do almost all the credible national candidates.
Very interesting. Obama has not come out against the death penalty.
He has not.
He said. That's very interesting. Well, Susan, there's never a stop to the fascinating flow of data and what's happening in these crucial times now, particularly for the Republican nomination and for the future of democracy. How's that? We'll keep monitoring it. That's Election Matters. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup editor-in-chief.
And I'm Susan Page of USA Today.